So we've got this two-tiered thing that we need to know about the federal fair housing laws. We've got protected classes and we've got compliance with the law. That's what PSI wants to kind of talk about here. Protected classes, we need to talk about covered transactions. There are 4 specific laws and their effects. Compliance with these laws, types of violations and their enforcement actions, and then there are exceptions. There are going to be situations in anti-discrimination where it is okay to be discriminatory, and it's okay to be able to say things and do things, and we're going to find when it's okay. And they're going to test you on these exceptions. Now, there's a couple of really important points up front when it comes to exam writers in anti-discrimination. One of the big ones is expect a decent amount of anti-discrimination questions. The reason why is because there are situations that you're going to learn about where it's okay to be discriminatory. And the truth is test writers know that. They know that morally and ethically people are going to be really concerned when they read an anti-discrimination question, and they're always going to err on the side of, yes, this was discriminatory, and you can't do that. But there will be situations where we can, in fact, be sort of discriminatory under certain conditions, and those are things that they love to test you on. There's going to be a lot of questions on this section, so just sort of be on guard because you're going to definitely see them. All right, you're definitely going to see these. All right, so let us get into this by kind of talking about, I'll go over here, that there are, with fair housing, there are several things that we need to know about the fair housing laws. So let's start to cover them. The first couple of things that we need to know is that they're looking for the specific laws and their effects and certain types of covered transactions. All right, and then we'll talk about compliance and exceptions later. So with fair housing, there are 2 major fair housing laws or anti-discrimination laws in the United States. And again, the first one is all about housing. All right, so we've got something called the Fair Housing Act. This is just to teach you guys a little bit about common law versus statutory law. So something that you guys ought to know is that anytime you see the phrase act, the Fair Housing Act, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, any of these acts that you see, these are statutes. Statutes are written by legislative bodies and enacted into law. So the Fair Housing Act is statute versus common law. One of the big differences between common law and statutory law is that common law is court cases and court decisions. So Tristram's Landing is an example of common law. All right, so Tristram's Landing is an example of common law. The Fair Housing Act is a statute. All right, and in that white booklet that I was telling you guys to read before, that's administrative law. So sort of coupled together, we have administrative law, we have statutory law, and then we have common law. Common law are court cases, administrative law are like that book, The Rules and Regulations for Real Estate Professionals, and then statutory law, which is like this, the Fair Housing Act. So together, they sort of make up this, all of our big body of law, basically. All right, so we've got the Fair Housing Act. And then in addition to the Fair Housing Act, which is covering housing, we have this other major law called the Equal Credit Opportunity, I'll just write OP Act. All right, so the Fair Housing Act, and then we have the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Now, these 2 laws make up our anti-discrimination world, and there's 2 more laws that we add to this that sort of make up the entire realm of anti-discrimination. We'll talk about the other 2 in just a minute. But these 2 are the main ones. Now, the Fair Housing Act deals with housing, and then the Equal Credit Opportunity Act deals with lending. So the first thing I want you guys to know is what are the covered transactions? And these 2 laws are dealing with housing and lending. Okay, so that's the first thing that I want you guys to understand. Housing and lending, that's what these 2 are dealing with. Now, we're going to be looking at the specific protected classes in just a little bit. But before we kind of get there, let me explain 2 other ones by looking at this slide over here. This slide over here, I've given you, these are the 4 anti-discrimination laws that we deal with. And the 2 that I want to separate first is we'll talk about Americans with Disabilities Act and the Community Redevelopment or Reinvestment Act. The dates for these two specific laws are not important. The only one where we have to memorize dates are the Fair Housing Act, which I guarantee you're going to see on your exam. So that's a high probability. We'll talk about those later. We'll talk about equal credit. We'll talk about fair housing. Let's just pick off the middle two here, the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Community Redevelopment and Reinvestment Act. So let's first do the ADA. The ADA is the only one of these four anti-discrimination laws that deals specifically with commercial spaces. So ADA, all of the other ones are dealing with residential or lending and residential transactions and these types of things. Really, the only one of these four that are specifically dealing only with commercial spaces is the ADA. So I want you to take a note that the ADA deals with commercial spaces. You will see all of these in Unit 18. The next thing is, if you are an employer and you have 15 or more employees, then the internal workspace is also subject to the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we're talking about this right here, right above us. And so if you're an employer and you have 15 or more employees, then your internal workspace is also subject to the ADA. So you need to be in compliance with the ADA if you're internal workspace, or if you're a commercial space, your commercial spaces need to be in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
The federal law that prohibits discrimination on the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, and disability is called, letter A, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Letter B, the Fair Housing Act. Letter C, the Community Redevelopment Act. Letter D, the Equal Housing Opportunities Act. And the answer is letter B, the Fair Housing Act. Okay, so this is the easy one. This should be a straight up, hey, what is this thing? You want to be familiar with all of those laws. You want to be familiar with the Fair Housing Act and the 7 protected classes that you just looked at in this question. And you also want to know a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act, a little bit about the Community Redevelopment Act, and a little bit about the Equal Housing Opportunity Act, or the ECOA, all of which are popular on exams. But the big anti-discrimination law that you learn about, that you learn all the little twists and pieces, the exemptions and everything else, is the Fair Housing Act. Which of the following is not a protected class under the Federal Fair Housing Act in the United States? Letter A, familial status. Letter B, religion. Letter C, color. Letter D, military status. And the answer is letter D, military status. Okie dokie. So, on exams for fair housing on the federal and state levels, depending on where you're taking these tests, y'all are going to have to definitely memorize protected classes. It is one of the things that you actually need to know and get into the nitty-gritty and actually learn all these little specifics. So you definitely want to know, what is a protected class, which are the protected classes on the federal level, and then in the states that you're working in, what are the protected classes in addition to the federal ones? What are those in addition? So you want to kind of memorize those. And here, military status is not a protected class on the federal level. However, familial status, religion, and color all are. So definitely military status. Now, in many states, like here in Massachusetts, for example, military status or veteran status is a protected class here in the Commonwealth. Which of the following is a provision of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the ECOA, in the United States? Letter A, prohibits discrimination in lending based on income. Letter B, mandates equal interest rates for borrowers regardless of creditworthiness. Letter C, prohibits discrimination in lending based on federally protected classes. Letter D, protects consumers from deceptive advertising practices. And the answer is letter C, prohibits discrimination in lending based on federally protected classes. So which of the following is a provision of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act? I want y'all to know that they will many times refer to this one as the ECOA, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, and you just want to also know the protected classes under the ECOA as you are studying the ones for the Fair Housing Act as well. So between the two, they share a couple of protected classes, and then they are definitely different. So like the ECOA, for instance, covers age, marital status, and the receipt of public assistance on the federal level. And the Fair Housing Act covers race, color, religion, national origin, sex, familial status, and disability. They equally share the first five: race, color, religion, national origin, and sex. And then the other ones are a little bit different. So you definitely want to know these. This is a great version of an explanation of what is the ECOA. I would study it. It's going to help you with your exam.